Imagine stepping onto a plane, confident, accomplished, proud, only to be met with disdain before you even find your seat. That was Dr. Aaliyah Monroe's reality. Aaliyah, a young black surgeon who had just completed a groundbreaking surgery across the country, was boarding a flight home. First-class ticket in hand, her heart was full. This was a milestone she had promised herself she'd reach after years of sleepless nights, medical school debts, and silent battles against stereotypes. She approached the first-class gate, sleek black suitcase rolling behind her posture poised, her spirit radiant. But the moment she handed her boarding pass to the flight attendant, she caught the glance of the pilot, Captain Rick Adams, a tall, aging white man whose eyes flicked with something bitter the moment they landed on her. As Aaliyah walked down the jet bridge, Rick leaned over to the flight attendant and muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Must be lost," probably meant for Coach. The attendant's awkward chuckle and glance toward Aaliyah told her she had heard right. A tight knot formed in Aaliyah's stomach, but she said nothing. Instead, she smiled politely and found her seat, 1A. As she settled in, Rick made a point to pass by, his voice cutting through the cabin as he addressed her. "Miss, first class is reserved for premium passengers only." The entire front of the plane turned to look. Aaliyah looked him square in the eye, steady and calm. "I know, that's why I'm here," she replied coolly, flashing her first-class boarding pass. Rick smirked, clearly unconvinced. "Maybe next time, let's make sure you're in the right place before we delay boarding for everyone else, huh?" There was an uncomfortable silence. Some passengers shifted in their seats. Some looked away, but no one said a word. Aaliyah sat quietly. Her blood boiled, but she knew better than to make a scene. She had learned long ago, never react when you have the power to respond. The plane took off and Aaliyah pulled out her laptop, reviewing notes for her upcoming keynote speech at a national medical conference. Ironically, the topic, diversity and representation in medicine. Across the aisle, a businessman peered over, noticing her slides. "Are you a nurse?" he asked casually. Aaliyah smiled. "No," she said warmly. "I'm a surgeon." He blinked, taken aback. Before he could respond, a commotion broke out at the front. The head flight attendant whispered urgently to Captain Rick, who visibly paled. A passenger had collapsed in economy. Heart attack. The flight attendant called out, panic rising, "Is there a doctor on board?" Rick immediately looked around, desperate, and there was Aaliyah, calmly standing up. "I'm a doctor," she said, her voice strong, unwavering. The pilot's face twisted in disbelief. "Are you sure you're qualified?" he stammered. The businessman who had questioned her earlier stood too, pointing at her laptop. "She's a surgeon," he said almost reverently. Without another word, Aaliyah rushed to the passenger, directing the cabin crew with precision. Her hands moved skillfully, checking vitals, assessing the situation. Passengers watched in awe as she stabilized the man using only the limited resources available. Within minutes, she had saved his life. The once quiet cabin erupted in applause. The same people who had doubted her were now looking at her like she was a superhero. Captain Rick, red-faced and humiliated, mumbled a forced "thank you." Aaliyah didn't even glance his way. When the plane landed, paramedics boarded immediately. The saved passenger was wheeled off, stable and conscious, mouthing a tearful "thank you" to Aaliyah as he went. As she gathered her belongings to disembark, Rick approached her sheepishly. "Listen, I didn't mean to," but Aaliyah raised a hand, silencing him without a word. She wasn't interested in his excuses. She was interested in change. As she walked off the plane, other passengers clapped again, this time in respect, not pity. The airline's CEO, who had been traveling incognito in business class, witnessed the entire ordeal. Word traveled fast, and when Aaliyah received a call the next day, it wasn't an apology. It was an invitation. An invitation to speak directly to the board about bias training for all their pilots and staff, starting with Rick Adams. Justice wasn't just served, it was being rewritten. But just as Aaliyah prepared to share her story, she received an anonymous email, threatening her to stay silent or risk everything she had worked for. And it wasn't from a stranger, it was from someone inside the airline, someone with power. But who, and how far would they go to silence her? The email warning Aaliyah to stay quiet kept flashing in her mind as she stepped out of her car and walked toward the airline's towering headquarters. But fear was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She had come too far. Inside the sleek glass building, a long table stretched across the executive conference room. 10 high-ranking board members sat stiffly, papers in front of them, faces unreadable. And sitting awkwardly to the side in a wrinkled uniform and a crooked tie was Captain Rick Adams, the man who had belittled her on that flight, thinking she didn't belong. He refused to meet her eyes. The CEO, a sharp-eyed man with silver hair, spoke first. "Dr. Monroe, we're here to hear your concerns. But I'll warn you, this company values its reputation." Aaliyah smiled politely. "So do I," she said, laying a folder on the table. Inside were documents, photographs, and testimonials. Not just her experience, but dozens of black passengers who had suffered similar mistreatment across the airline's fleet. Her voice didn't tremble once as she laid it all bare. The dismissive attitudes, the casual racism, the unspoken rules about who was welcome and who wasn't. Slide after slide appeared on the large monitor behind her. Statistics, lawsuits, settlements swept under the rug. Every word struck like a hammer. The room grew tense. Rick shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the color draining from his face. The board members whispered behind their hands. Finally, the CEO cleared his throat. "And what exactly are you demanding, Dr. Monroe?" Without missing a beat, she answered, "A public apology, immediate termination of staff who violate anti-discrimination policies, comprehensive bias training for all employees, mandatory, and meaningful partnerships with Black advocacy organizations to rebuild trust." There it was. Bold, uncompromising. Silence. Rick's mouth twitched, about to protest, but the CEO raised his hand sharply. One board member, an older woman in a pearl necklace, leaned forward. "Dr. Monroe, this could cause a media storm. We'd rather settle this quietly. Perhaps some form of financial compensation?" The air grew heavy. For a moment, Aaliyah looked at the folder she had brought. All she had to do was accept their money and walk away. No risk. No backlash. But that wasn't why she came. She came to make sure the next little black girl who walked onto a plane wouldn't be asked, "Are you lost?" Wouldn't be questioned. Wouldn't be humiliated. She stood up slowly, her voice steady. "I'm not here to be paid off," she said. "I'm here to be heard, to be respected. Just like everyone else who buys a ticket and deserves better." The executives sat frozen. For the first time, they realized. They hadn't invited a victim into their boardroom. They had invited a force. Later that afternoon, the airline's official statement was released to every major news outlet. "We apologize unreservedly to Dr. Aaliyah Monroe and all our passengers who have been mistreated. Effective immediately, sweeping reforms will be enacted across all divisions to ensure dignity and respect for every traveler." Captain Rick Adams was fired the same day with a public acknowledgement of his misconduct. And Aaliyah? She became more than just a successful neurosurgeon. She became a symbol of change. Television interviews, speaking engagements, articles praising her courage. Her story wasn't just about standing up to a rude pilot. It was about demanding to be seen, demanding to be valued. Months later, at a major conference on diversity in aviation, Aaliyah stood before a packed auditorium, her heart full. "When I walked into that plane," she told the crowd, "I was reminded how often we are judged by the way we look rather than who we are. But I'm here to tell you, your worth isn't decided by a uniform, a title, or anyone else's assumptions. It's decided by the life you live, the courage you show, and the truth you refuse to silence." The audience rose to their feet, clapping, whistling, some with tears in their eyes. A standing ovation, and somewhere deep inside her, the little girl who once wondered if she would ever truly belong, stood up and clapped too. Never allow anyone's limited view of you to limit your dreams. Your identity, your success, your dignity are not up for debate. Speak your truth, stand your ground, and trust that real power comes from within,